that my video pops back up. I might turn it off really quick and reset it. So we'll see how this works.
Okay.
It should be okay. Fingers crossed. Where is it? It didn't do what it normally does. Okay, we're live right now. Excellent, fantastic. Well, hello everybody and welcome to Findmypast Let's Discuss. It's Wednesday afternoon in the Mountain Time Zone, and that means it's about 9 o'clock at night in the UK. So thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon or tonight, whatever time zone you happen to be in. My name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the Data Acquisition Manager for Findmypast for North America. And I am joined today by the wonderful and amazing Jackie Schalk, the director of the American Family of Immigration History Center at Ellis Island. Jackie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is going to be a really fun conversation. For those of you who have watched over the last couple of weeks, you know the kind of the basic setup, but we'll go through it again. Let's Discuss was started as a Facebook Live series intentionally in the US hours so that we could provide some interesting content and hopefully some community engagement while we all kind of work our way through the COVID-19 pandemic and our stay-at-home orders and everything that comes with that. So we are hoping that you will join the conversation today. Post questions on the stream, write in comments, whatever it feels like, share resources, share links to websites that you've used, whatever it is that you feel you can contribute to the conversation. We'd love to hear what you have to say and what you can offer. Everybody has something to teach everybody else. So that's what Let's Discuss is all about. We do this series every Wednesday afternoon. I think that's all the things I have to say in advance. So let me introduce Jackie really quick because everybody should know who she is, although I don't think everybody does. Jackie has been the site manager of the History Center at Ellis Island for 13 years. Ellis Island, of course, is a hub for stories and American genealogy. Jackie is passionate about using storytelling as a tool to unlocking family mysteries. And I do know every time you and I have had a conversation, Jackie, you've talked about telling stories. So I can vouch for that. Let me give you a little bit about the American Family Immigration History Center and the Ellis Island database. That was a project that was created in partnership with both the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation and Family Search, which launched on April 17th, 2001. So we've had many, many years of wonderful resources as a result of that partnership. Over 12,000 volunteers donated nearly 5.6 million hours to that project. There were 3,678 boxes of microfilm manifests, and data was entered for 22 million passengers. That is an incredible undertaking. I want all of you in your brains to think about what it looks like when you go to your favorite library with microfilm and think about how many, 3,678 of those little white boxes, what that might look like, right? That's an incredible project. Jackie, where do you want to start? I mean, there's so much about Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty that I think gets confusing for people. Why don't we start with the basics, right? Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, two different things.
Two different things. And it's not unusual that people, when they come to visit us at the museum, will say, where's the way to Liberty now? Or where's the subway? And it's like, no, you're on an island.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of misconceptions, especially as to what the process was, starting at the very beginning. So when the ships would come into the harbor, they didn't enter New York Harbor right away. They would stop at a quarantine station, Hoffman Island. They didn't dock there. It was the inspector at Ellis Island, who was in the boarding division. He would report to the barge office at 6 a.m, and he would check the ticker tape for any telegraph reports to see what ships had come in. And then from there, he would meet with U.S. Customs, and the officer would join him on a government tugboat, and they would travel to meet the boat that had come in the night before or that morning. And they would board on these rope ladders. And once they would board, that's when they would meet the chief purser. They met the captain and the surgeon. And then all those affidavits you see in between those microfiche pages, those are the validity of the documents. They had to swear to the truth of the documents themselves, the manifests. And then they would make their way to the Grand Saloon. And then in the Grand Saloon, they would meet with first cabin passengers, second, and finally they would meet with the U.S. Citizens. And that was all as they were traveling their way to the pier itself. The pier that belonged to the steamship company. Of course, if there was any contagious diseases found along the way, they would have to make a stop at Hoffman Island to drop off those who did no longer belong on the ship, right? So, and then from there, anyone who was steerage, they would be given a manifest tag, and then they would take the steamboats or barges to Ellis Island for further inspection. And that's why it was such a long day.
Yeah, that's
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I complain about my commute to Ellis Island when I work there, but
like I joke about my commute about 20 steps down into the lower level of my house. But all of that after this long voyage, right?
Exactly. 7 to 10 days or more.
Yeah, right. So a couple of people just saying hello. So I wanted to say hello to everybody as well. Rose, Deborah from Surrey, thank you for joining us. Anne Marie and Janet, Norma from Buckhaven, Fife in Scotland. Jackie and I both love Scotland. I know that about us. Karen is in North London. Sharon in San Clementine out in California. William, who is a regular. Thanks, William, for being with us. And Patricia. Rose says that 22 million is what's the 22 million passengers in the database is what he's referring to. He says that's about a third of the UK population.
Oh my God. Yeah, but you know, it's funny. It's funny. It's said you say that because I was thinking about the timeline of my great grandfather the other day, and between the years of like 1904 and 1913 in Scotland, over 600,000 Scots left. So when you put it into perspective, maybe it's not so off, 22 million.
Yeah, well, and then but you start to incorporate all those Eastern European countries and just, you know, everywhere, right around the world. And you think about I've visited Ellis Island a couple of times now, and every time I go into the hall, all I can think about is the noise it would have been, right? The genuine just chaos of all of those languages and cultures and clothing and luggage and smells and sounds, just everything. Just it must have been just incredibly overwhelming to walk through that building.
Yeah, and I mean, just for myself, I was at Ellis Island last week. I drove in because we do have a parking lot in the back, which most people don't realize, and just one person's echo. It was a janitor on the 3rd floor, and I could hear it piercing. So you could only imagine,
right?
Yeah. So
yeah,
it's true.
Yeah. All right. So, a couple more. Penny is with us from Bristol. I know Penny's left a couple comments. So thanks, Penny, for joining us. That's great. Marie says, hi from Boston. Again, thanks for joining us, Marie. She says, I love Scotland too. Yeah, absolutely. Stephen is with us from Essex, it looks like. And we have Jane from Lincolnshire. So all sorts of people. That's great. So as you join the stream, please remember that if you have questions or comments or stories you want to share, by all means, please throw them in the comments. Rose actually said that her paternal grandparents went through Ellis, and she's made a rubbing on a paper of their names on the wall, which
very cool.
Yeah, is very cool. Actually, a little jealous of people because I had lots of immigrants, obviously, but none of them came through Ellis Island. Not a single one.
Well, now that we're the National Museum of Immigration since 2015, you could still celebrate Ellis Island as being your own. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So Jackie, tell us a little bit about what we might need to know in terms of if you're just starting your research on your immigrant ancestor and you are suspicious that perhaps they went through Ellis Island, where do you start?
Okay, so certainly when we meet with families each day, one of the key things is the story. To dig up what the story is that you know, and keep an open mind because it's probably false. And I say that it's a hard thing to say, but I've been burned in the past myself with my own family history. So just keep an open mind and an open net. And along with that goes with the databases themselves. So for example, our database, it's very much the 80-20 rule. There could be something missing, and that's why you're running into a brick wall. For example, the first name is missing, the last name is missing. It's labeled as female instead of male. So having this open net, always very important. But beyond that, if you're just starting your research, sometimes you have to go forward to go backwards. So I usually suggest looking at census records first. Census records, marriage records, so that you can collect the name of the father's parents, the groom's parents rather, and the, having as much in front of you data as possible will help you fan out, because oftentimes you're not going to find them right away in the database. You're going to need to look for the cousin first. You're going to need to look for the sister first. You're going to need to find somebody else who's already established in the country, because it's not unusual that they didn't go straight to Missouri. They may have stopped in Pennsylvania first, and it'll really throw you off. You won't be, you'll see them in front of you and you won't know that the manifest belongs to you. So
yeah, and it's I find that the more stories I hear about what it was like when they actually stepped off the boat, right? You had this potential other ancestor sitting out somewhere in the United States that's already established. But then you also have representatives from railroad companies or other agencies kind of around the country saying, hey, you know what? North Dakota is a really cool place. Like, you should move there. Just get on my train right now and go. And some of that really did happen. And
it did.
And so there's a lot happening when they step off the boat. There's a lot to take in. So it must have just, beyond actually being processed through Ellis Island, it must have been just really overwhelming.
Yeah. So like for example, I worked with Michael Kors last year, and he said to me, he said, my great grandmother told me she came when she was 9 years old and that she was all alone and she went to Boston. Can you help me find this? Well, we did find it, but she was 18 years old and going to Patterson to her brother Emil. So it was a totally different story.
Right.
But that happens all the time. They'll go, oh, this is actually what happened. And that is exactly the kind of case examples you need to think about when you're starting research for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Karen actually said, and this goes along with what we've been talking about, my great-great-grandfather, grandmother, and all their children except for my great-great-grandfather migrated to US in the 1880s. How can I find if they went through Ellis Island?
Right. So the Ellis Island database is between, or New York port, is between 1820 and beyond. I think right now it stops at 1960. On our website, it's 1957. Yep. You can find records for 1880, but they were not processed at Ellis Island. And any records prior to the fire, which was June 15th, 1897, they're no longer with us. They were destroyed in the fire. Everything was gone. It was Georgia pine that the building was burnt to. Like, there's nothing left. So we replaced those with customs lists. And the customs lists, they were at the U.S. Customs House. Again, like I said in the beginning, the U.S. Customs officer meets with the boarding department, and they were very much part of the story because they were also processing people at the same time. They were checking for dutiable goods. And so those records are very limited on information. Oftentimes, Patrick is going to be listed as PAT or PTK. So you have to take care when searching, because there's very limited information, and often things are abbreviated because they weren't serving the purpose of inspection. They were serving the purpose for taxes and such.
Right. Yep. So another great place to start actually is on Findmypast, of course. We have collected a variety of passenger lists covering a huge time frame, actually, from 1500s during the colonial era, from outside of London, all the way through kind of as modern as we can. But one of the things that we've done to help with this start to the process of your immigration research is create what we called the British and Irish Roots Collection. So we've taken everything that has any indication of an origin country that might have some note that they left that location, and dumped it all into one big bucket. So you have one search to search across a vast number of record sets. I'll share the link in the chat. But what it allows you to do is actually find, and let's, maybe it's the 1880 US Census says they're from Ireland. Well, that's a key, that's a clue to their source of origin, right? And so if you can find them in one of these other record sets, like Jackie's been talking about, the census is a great example, or naturalization papers, then potentially you can actually backtrack to the voyage itself. And keep in mind that Ellis Island certainly was not the only port across the eastern seaboard, right? There are lots and lots of ways to enter North America. So if you're looking in Canada, you want to, focus on Canadian records and Canadian immigration, but also look at records that cross the border. There's border crossing records between Canada and the United States, so that you can actually see if they went back and forth between the two countries over land, and all the way down to basically every major port down to New Orleans, Galveston, Texas, and then up the side of California and into Seattle and Vancouver. So it's a big country. They could have come in a variety of ways, right?
Exactly. Ellis Island is most recognized, of course, because it's prominent, iconic, a part of American history.
Yeah.
World War II, our soldiers saw Statue of Liberty as they were left. I mean, it's in here for all of us, for not just for us as Americans, but for the world. But it was also the busiest. It was a hub. It had over 120 employees a day, and they had the shift turns, like 8 to 12 inspectors would be processing immigrants at one time, and they would take breaks after 200 immigrants seen.
So Cindy asked where are the records from 1880 kept. And Cindy, I'll just throw in, you might want to check Castle Garden, which I'll share the link in the chat as well. The Castle Garden Immigration Index runs from 1820 to 1913, so that's an opportunity. Jackie, do you want to contribute anything else to that 1880 question?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you can search Castle Garden. It is indexed and available since November, I think, of 17 or 18. I think 18. And so you can search a database as well for Castle Garden records. But where the physical records are is kind of interesting, because many people ask, that's one of those big myths, like the big book with all the names from the movie Hitch with all the signatures, right? Right. And I will eventually convince my org to charge money for that, because I'll tell you, we would make a fortune. But anyway, the actual books themselves no longer exist as far as the Ellis Island peak years, but the customs lists actually do exist. They did survive, and today they're actually in Philadelphia, but they belong they're in the custody of the National Archives of New York, but the warehouse is in Philadelphia.
Gotcha. Yep. So you mentioned myths.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go into that, because that's always one of our favorites. Of course, one of the most predominant myths about Ellis Island is that they changed my ancestor's name when they got off the boat. Jackie, tell us about how they didn't change anybody's names at Ellis Island.
No, we were just talking before we went live how if you were boarding a JetBlue flight, when you bought your ticket, you had to fill out a form with all the information for the agent that works for the plane, for the company, and then the plane manifest will sit on board with the plane. So it's the same concept. Those who bought tickets, whether it was the family in America that was helping or they bought it themselves, they had to fill out a form. So it's the immigrants are the ones who are providing the details, and then those are later given to the steamship companies. They're responsible for the manifest. They're recorded in the country of origin, not recorded at Ellis Island. And as I said before, the captain is meeting with the inspector for boarding, and they're checking to make sure that everything's valid. They're signing off on it. And then that's when the manifest arrives to Ellis Island. And that's when the inspection process takes place. And they're making corrections to these mistakes. They're not making up a new name for an immigrant. It just didn't happen. It's kind of ironic in a way, because one thing that we don't always think about is the verification clerks. They also worked at Ellis Island. So years later, when you applied for citizenship, they're going through your manifest again in the file department, and they're checking to see that you did come on the date that you came. And then they're going to fill out a card for you, a verification card. So they're doing double, triple, quadruple checks in different periods of history at Ellis Island. So it's kind of unfair that all these employees have been given this terrible reputation. It's awful.
Bad rap.
Very, very. They were helping you. They were helping you.
That's great. Okay, so what other myths do you come across often besides the name change thing that you want to take an opportunity to clear up?
Well, oh my gosh.
Put you on the spot, huh?
You
can
really
think about it if
did.
you want.
Um, so, I mean, I think we've covered, like, the big ones are the name change. The names weren't changed on Ellis Island. That I guess mistreatment of that they were mistreated. That's sometimes the question that we get, especially for younger kids. They want to know how they were treated at Ellis Island. But again, how are you treated at the airport? Like, you're told to move along, right? And it's
Right.
kind of like similar, like, to like a sporting event. You had to move along. You were in line for literally hours until it was your turn, and then 1, 2, 3, they're done in 2 minutes, and then you've passed through the gate and you're going into boarding. So it's similar to that.
Yeah, don't block your door on the way through, right?
Um,
Yeah. So what, but there were people who were held.
yes.
So tell us a little bit about that. What do we need to know about that part of the process?
Well, fortunately, all of those, all of anyone who was detained, special inquiries, there's different, like, stages that they would have experienced. Only 2% were actually deported, maybe 10% that actually had to go through, like, the special inquiry process, and maybe 20% that were pulled aside for further inspection. So on the manifest, there'll be an annotation that'll say, over the health portion, it'll say med.cert, med certif. So they received a medical certificate. And what that means in the process is, when they went through the first inspection, going up the stairs, meeting with the doctor, going into the Great Hall, something didn't look right. So that's when they get the chalk mark. Chalk mark begins around 1907. So that's when you're going to see notations about medical certificates too. So they'll be marked with chalk, and then they're going to go into what they called the doctor's pen at the time. Medical certificate was issued, and then they would have to have further inspection for medical. So there's different reasons why someone would be detained. Most often it was women and children who were detained, because they needed to have someone to escort them. My great grandmother was one of those. My great grandmother is a whole other story, though, because and not to go off subject, but it really bothered me that I didn't find that one right away. That was one that I should have. I started working at Ellis Island in 2007. And I was like, I'm going to find my great grandmother. This is fantastic. There were so many stories about her, because she said that she didn't buy the ticket, her sister did, and that she was using her sister's papers, and that she lied to the inspectors at Ellis Island, and it wasn't her, but it was somebody else. She put a different name, and it was always Tessie. We were told it was Tessie that was the ticket she used. And once I opened my mind to realize, like, wait, I got to step away from this story. Just because it's my story, I know better. So I went to the census. I looked up all the different sisters, and it turns out that there was a Margaret Byrne. So once I looked up Maggie, I found her record, but it's so unusual. So on records, they always will indicate that there's an alias. Somehow she got away with not getting caught for that. She was detained, but the reason was because she didn't have her sponsor waiting for her. So they wouldn't let her go right away. They had to get in touch with her brother John in Boston. But it's remarkable, because that particular case example, her outbound record says Lizzie, but her actual ship manifest says Maggie, which is unusual. They would have normally caught something like that. Yeah.
Right.
But detentions are indicated, and there's another sheet that, there's a form for special inquiry where you'll see the details as to why they were detained, if they were in the barred zone or not, how many meals they had. There's so much information on the manifest.
So that's clue number one. You got to find the manifest.
You really do.
And understand it. Understand everything that it's offering you.
Absolutely. You can have the address of the parents where they lived in Germany or in the UK, as well as the address they're going to in the United States. Oftentimes, learning about the occupation can be helpful, because then you can later go into newspapers and learn more about them. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Good. So I'm scrolling through comments. I'm going to try and get to as many of these as we can. We have some really interesting stories being shared, so it's cool to see all this. So Cindy, my great grandfather arrived from Italy and lived in Richmond County, New York. He petitioned the court to become a citizen in 1877. So that's pretty common, sending those naturalization papers. He removes the vowel from his last, or the vowel I from his last name at some point. How do I find more information on his arrival and shortening his last name? It sounds like shortening his last name was his choice.
Yeah.
So I would assume that the process just remains the same in terms of his actual arrival documents.
Yeah, and as the immigration policies change year after year, those who have ancestors that came like in the 1920s or the 1910s, they can follow more of a paper trail. There's more. For example, my great grandfather, you'll see the name change happen on a welfare application. So
Right.
those are little things you wouldn't think about, but you'll see year after year how the name is slowly altering more and more and more and more.
Absolutely. And your comment about naturalization law, citizenship law, is really, really crucial. If you have an ancestor that comes over after 1906, you're in the lucky group because the pile of paperwork gets significantly larger.
Yes.
And the details included in that paperwork are much more rich. Prior to 1906, you don't get as much. I'm going to take a second to recommend a book because I like recommending books. If you want to learn about the naturalization process and
That's a good
law,
book.
citizenship law in the United States, this is the one. It's Guide to Naturalization Records of the United States by Christina Schaefer. I'll put it up here. There, everybody can. There we go. Everybody can see it. Available from your favorite bookseller. It was published several years ago. I want to say in the 90s.
90s.
Yeah, 97. So this is kind of the naturalization Bible, in my world at least. If you can determine where they naturalized from, what state they were in, it actually goes through state by state and gives you all the resources by county, so you know exactly who to contact. Now, this is, again, published in 97. There's been a lot digitized and put online since then, but it's still a great resource to have because it will tell you exactly where on the Findmypast system or in the family search catalog to look for the records that you're interested in. So if you have naturalization or citizenship records, that's definitely one a book you want to refer to, whether it's at your library or you purchase a copy for yourself.
And I'm gonna
go
just
ahead.
jump in real fast. My books are at Ellis Island right now.
You're not sharing any books?
But I can't hold them up. But Jen's actually been to my office. My office is the ice house. It's inside the kitchen and laundry building, which is like the coolest thing. To be like, this served a purpose, and now it's my office. But I'm very much into the stories, of course. So I know on our website we have the Oral History Project, where you can actually listen to oral histories. And I am like addicted, always have been, to the government agents, like those who were employees during the time.
Yeah.
They were recorded in the 70s, and you can hear the stories from those who worked there, like from 1906 and 1910, and it's like, wow, so cool. Like that's the cool stuff. And a book that I would recommend is I froze a minute, I have to think about it. In the shadow, thank you. I had to think in my head. In the Shadow of Liberty. I'm like, wait, what is it? In the Shadow of Liberty, Edward Corsi, he was a commissioner. Like, it's fantastic because it's giving you his take also as an immigrant coming from Abruzzo, from Italy, and then again being a commissioner years later. Wow. So it's super cool.
So Suzanne rather asked if we could post the name of the books that we're sharing, and yes, sure. We will after the live stream's done. I'm happy to go back and post the anything that I reference, and Jackie, if you feel like it, you're welcome to do so as well. Yeah. We'd love to have you do that. Okay, a couple other questions. There was one that was really interesting earlier when we were chatting about something, and essentially the question was, the story goes that they came over, they went back to England, they came over, they went to Ireland, they finally kind of settled. How common was it for people to actually move back and forth across the ocean?
Of course, it depends on when and
time frames really important.
And where they were from. But for some, it was very common, especially Italians. Like the Italians and the Polish were very private people. So they would come and they would be boarders, or they would live in tenements until they can afford an apartment for the family. And then they would send the women and children. And that's why they can be difficult to find, especially the Italians, because the women are often traveling with their maiden names. And many times the children are dittoed with the maiden names of the mother. So if you're looking for Grandpa Joe, forget about that you're not using Giuseppe, which you need to use, but you also have to think about putting the maiden name of his mother, which you wouldn't normally think about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So,
In my research, I found that actually that back and forth voyage was far more common than we probably initially think when we start down this road. Like even in the colonial era, right? Most of the people who were coming over in the colonial period were in many cases were businessmen, right? And so they had business entities either out on the islands or along the East Coast. And so they were going back and forth pretty routinely. And you can't say that, of course, about everybody, but it is, it was very much a standard practice, just like it is today. Alec wants to know, do you know the exact location of the barge office at Lower Manhattan or what building it is today? I've tried identifying it on 1890 circa maps and could not find it indicated specifically. That is a tough question.
yeah, I'd have to get back to you because I also get confused as to where it is, where it was. I know it was very, very close to Castle Clinton. And I know that the building that's now Pier A, that was used to process anyone who is a dignitary, but it was like a police force there too. But I will have to get back to you because this is actually something I was looking at myself recently. But all along the Battery Park, a lot of those buildings served, like there was an Immigrant Aid Society, I think a Catholic organization that's
Yeah.
directly across the street. Of course, the
Yeah.
White Star Line building is right there. They were all very, very close. I don't think the barge office still exists today, but I believe it was somewhere in the vicinity of Pier A and Castle Clinton, and of course the Customs House.
Interesting. Okay, good. So I'm reading through Jane's comment. She's talking about one of her grandfather's uncles who came to the States through Ellis Island in 1902, moved out into Northern California, remained there until his death in 34, but he did go back and forth to the UK during his lifetime. She found his passport application and a few passenger lists, but has yet to find naturalization papers and obtain a death certificate, which I believe is not easy to get. We'll talk about that, Jane, because it certainly depends. I did sometime last year add his name in honor to the Wall of Honor at the Immigration Wall. I hope to visit Ellis Island, etc., at some point in the next year. So when I come to New York City again. You should definitely visit Ellis Island. Everybody should visit Ellis Island. I had the privilege, as Jackie mentioned, of actually going on a tour with her not too long ago, actually a few months ago. Feels like a long time now.
I know.
And she was able to kind of show myself and my colleague that we were with just a really kind of behind the scenes tour. It was exceptional. And it was just absolutely cool to see kind of, the stuff that nobody, most people, the tourists don't get to see. It was pretty neat. Very, very special. So let's talk though about whether or not you can find, Jane's story includes the idea that she cannot yet find naturalization papers for this particular ancestor. Jane, one thing that you should look at is the census records, 1880, 1900, 1910, I want to say, and I think 1920. I could be wrong about that, but for several years in the federal census, they actually tracked if you were an alien or if you had naturalized. So the first thing you want to do is actually confirm whether or not he ever reported that he finished that process. So check the census and make sure that it says that he naturalized, because if he never went through the process, then he's obviously not going to have citizenship papers. However, he will potentially have alien records, and that's a whole nother ballgame, which we'll talk about actually in another week or two with another guest. So keep in mind that. Yeah, go ahead. The census has that information. Jackie.
Just want to jump in about the barge office. A colleague of mine actually texted me.
Fantastic.
And the location, and that makes a lot of sense. The location was where the Staten Island ferry is today. They had to take it down because they had to make room for the battery tunnel. So thank you. I was going to ask him that later this week. Anyway.
That's good. All right, excellent. Okay. Susan suggests make sure to look for alternative spellings and sounds. My Walshes are recorded as Welshes, as their accent from the west of Ireland made it sound that way. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Miko just joined the live stream. I just want to say hi and give a little shout out to Miko, my colleague over in the UK. Thanks for watching, Miko. All right. If I've missed your question, be patient because I'm still scrolling through. But Jackie, while I do that, let's talk a little bit about it, and maybe this is perhaps beyond your expertise. I'm not sure. The process at Castle Garden, how much did it differ from the process at Ellis Island?
I mean, imagine you're much more contained. You've been in the arena, right? So that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
I just imagine, because I don't have a recording to go with. I don't have an oral history to listen to really be able to express. I haven't found a lot of documentation about that time, but I see the lines in the summer, 4 to 5 hour waits to come to Ellis Island, and then I think about all the people who are being in like processed there. I'd imagine it was just nothing but lines and waiting. And of course, those that would come down to the battery to talk to the immigrants to say, hey, for 25 cents, we're going to give you this pamphlet and it's going to give you all the answers. And, you know, that sort of, or telling them, oh, meet me after and I could set you up in an apartment up here, or I'll get you a
Right.
job over there. And they were kind of being abused, like, and taken advantage of. So, um, it was good in many ways that the federal that it went under federal control and that it was moved to an island. So and then in other ways not, but that's another story, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Karen says, my great grandfather went to New York to visit his family in 1892 and just found the manifest. Karen, if you mean that you just found the manifest while we have been on this live stream, I'm going to do a little jump for joy because that's really cool. But either way, I'm excited for you that you were able to locate that. That's always good news. Deborah says, for American citizens and residents who may have been visiting Europe, what was the process for the arrival back in the US? Did they have to line up with the new immigrants, or was there a separate process for returning citizens?
Yeah, I had mentioned it just before. They're processed on the boat on the way to the pier. So once they've gone through quarantine, they'll be processed with first and second cabin. So they disembarked at the pier that belonged to the steamship company, whether it was the White Star Line, the Red Star Line, and then they would just make their way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So keep those comments and questions coming. Ellen says, I agree with the back and forth bit. My grandfather went back, got married, and was extremely proud that he could afford second pass passage for my grandmother and uncle. Yeah, that's pretty cool. What was it like? Do you know much about the experience on the boat in terms of first class steerage? What kind of
I
story is that?
I mean, I hate to say it, but like Titanic, right? Because
did Hollywood get this one right?
possibly, because
Possibly.
everything I've read, it's been like the Grand Saloon where everyone would meet, and it's like this great big, you know, ballroom kind of feel, and they had these gorgeous like silk gowns, and you know, and honestly, the Victorian era is such a beautiful, like romantic. I think of the clothing, the lace, like it's just
Yeah.
gorgeous. The jewelry, like fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Karen did comment back. She said yes while she was listening. She made an account and found the manifest. So that's great.
Cool.
Karen, that's so good. That's what we want to hear. Absolutely. All right, good. So yeah, Facebook is always a lot of fun to work with. So there is a brand new museum. Well, it's not brand new anymore, I guess. 2 years old?
It's 1 year very soon. Very soon.
1
It's
year
this
very
week.
soon. Tell us a little bit about the museum.
The Statue of Liberty Museum. So honestly, after Hurricane Sandy, and even before that, 9/11, there's a limit as to how many people can come like to visit inside the statue. And we really just wanted to make the Statue of Liberty accessible for everyone. Only 10% roughly of people get to go inside the statue each year, and then maybe 3% to the crown. Um, and so having a place, a home where we could tell the story of liberty and freedom and everything that represents the American creed, and it's beautiful. It's a place that people are now gathering and experiencing, and it's for education purposes too. So I mean, it's a wonderful story, and it like I said, last year it opened, so it's a 1 year anniversary this week. I think it's the 19th.
Is it
I'm
this
I
week?
Yeah.
Wow. It feels like I've been thinking about it for a long time, but maybe that's
Hmm.
just that kind of Americana piece.
Yeah.
I was able to visit the museum last a few months ago when I was in New York. And yeah, it's a very emotional spot. I definitely cried a little bit as I walked and made my way through the museum. It's pretty powerful. So if you get the chance, certainly take advantage and try and hit up the museum. It's a really um, moving museum, but it's also absolutely a place of education. So it's well worth your time in terms of a research
Hmm.
perspective as well. All right, couple other. Oh, Cindy's asking, where did you make an account to find the manifest? We've shared some links, Cindy, in the chat. So keep in mind, one of the ones that you want to look for is I'm trying to remember what I called it. It's just passenger search on Liberty Ellis Foundation.org/passenger, but that is in the comments, so you can take a look at that. There's also an aspect of the immigration story that we haven't really talked about very much yet with you, and that is the actual departure part, right? At some point, these individuals had to make a decision to leave everything they've ever known, potentially for hundreds of years in their family, behind, say goodbye to everybody, possibly for the last time they're ever going to see their family members again, and actually make this intentional decision to get on a boat and travel across this giant ocean. And there is a possibility for tracing this. There's a handful of records, passenger lists leaving the UK. And of course, Liverpool was one of the largest ports in the world during this period. So there's a significant amount of traffic moving through England specifically. Does Ellis Island talk about, and do you explore those stories in terms of the departure and the decision-making process? Do you have stories about that you can share?
Um, well, what I would say is, if we think about like the timeline of 100 years ago, and I'll just take again like my great grandfather leaving Scotland. So he was born in 1898. And he traveled first cabin. He was a golf course professional from Carnoustie. So his life was not hard, but lives for everyone 100 years ago was hard. So
Right.
he served in World War One. He survived Spanish flu. He had the Great Depression when he came to America. And then he had the World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War all before the age of 55. So when you think about it, um, even for first cabin, even for those who were well off, and he had a very good life here, life was just hard. It was hard times 100 years ago. So,
Yeah.
but certainly for those who were escaping persecution or war or poverty, or those who didn't have a choice, they were exiled. Um, this was an opportunity, so their children can now practice their religions, their faith. Like, so there was a more hope than apprehension. There was more positive than negative, and that's why the Island of Hope, Island of Tears really rings true, because there was a lot of uncertainty, but at the same time it was nothing but gold, like the golden streets, the golden door. It was the possibilities.
Yeah, I think the possibilities would have driven 99% maybe of the passengers that came over during this era. It's really an incredible thing to think about, right? The millions of people that entered North America at this time frame. And yeah, today we're talking about Ellis Island specifically, but it's such a broad subject, right? It's such a broad thing to try and put your hands around and actually understand from any context. I personally prefer to do a lot of social history type research with my genealogy. I like to understand the motivation behind decision making and how innovation impacted my ancestors. One of my favorite examples of that is the invention of barbed wire. Right when barbed wire was invented, I had two ancestors on two sides of the family homesteading in Nebraska, and they both would have been able to purchase barbed wire at some point. And how did that change their world and change their life? Because it really was a monumental change on the plains, right, for its
Mm.
time. And so that concept of trying to understand the voyage, understand what it was like on the ship, understand what it was like to walk through the lines and wait for hours and hours on end, with every possession you brought kind of grasped to your side and your children getting antsy. I mean, you know, we're both mothers. I couldn't even imagine standing in that line with my daughter. She's a very patient child, but she's not that good. Like, and you know, and yet all this is happening, and they're looking to the front door and going, I'm almost there. I've almost made it. And now actually the real journey begins and the real struggle begins, but I'm so close. I can feel the breeze on my face. Like, that had to be incredible.
One thing I would just plug in that I recommend is learning more about what life was like for your ancestor where they lived.
Absolutely.
Google books, like anything, just to learn what it was like, because you know there's a reason why they left most, I mean, most of the time, right? So like even my ancestors from Carnoustie, they were weavers, you know, before, and then the Industrial Revolution happened, and everything changed. What was considered craftsman was now blue collar work, and they made their way to the coast and they started to work on the golf courses, and golf was being brought to America and they became
Right.
ambassadors. So
Yeah.
that's how they came to America. But if you look at what their lives were like just 100 years before the 100 years,
Right.
they were very happy. They had, you know, the looms in their homes and they had nice things. You never would picture that they would be leaving for America for opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. One of my families that I've been working on recently is, they're Germans from Russia, and immigrated into Canada, technically in the early 1900s. But in the research about the environment in which they lived before they left, I've realized that it was less than a year after they left that the village was just decimated. All the men were taken into camps in Siberia, and you know, mostly for religious reasons. And I'm sitting there thinking, I know I had ancestors who didn't come. I don't know their names. I don't know who they were, but I know we had family that experienced that part of history, and thinking about those that came versus those that didn't, right? And how they made that decision and why they left.
Right.
Okay, so 15 minutes to go. We're doing good. And we're getting off on tangents because Jackie and I both like to tell stories, but let's keep going on questions. So let's see, there was one. Oh, I think I scrolled past it. Okay. We have a question about Ellis Island employees. What records might be available for those who actually worked on the island, and where can we access those materials?
Yeah, they're not accessible. There's some it, we don't really have a lot of records about the employees, and they're not accessible. Um, but what I can tell you is that, you know, there not only were there employees such as the clerks and the inspectors, but there was also the landscapers and,
Right,
you know, like
janitors and
yeah, like
yeah,
it was just tons of people who were working like vendors in the restaurants. There was those who worked you know, in baggage handling as, you know, a vendor. So yeah, we don't have records that are accessible for the employees, but certainly write in to our librarians at the Bob Hope Memorial Library. And if there is anything about your ancestor, they can track it for you. But we don't have like a database where you can search, no.
So yeah, so there is a library at Ellis Island, and there's records there. But it's what, appointment by appointment if you
By
want to
appointment.
research?
By
Yeah.
appointment.
Okay. And then what about events that happened potentially while they were waiting or while they were being detained? So for example, if a baby was born on Ellis Island, where is that birth record? Is it considered Manhattan? Is it somewhere else?
It's a good question. Yeah. So that's so if born in America, they I have to get back to you on that because there's disagreement about that. So but there is a birth record for sure, and the same with born at sea, died at sea. All of those things are recorded. as far as the different processes, it depends on the time in history too.
Yeah, totally.
For example, like in World War II, we received it was actually even beyond like just well, yeah, World War II, like Cold War years. People were being detained and they were held in the baggage and dormitory building. We had a Austrian prince that was detained and a Russian princess, and the FBI came and would interrogate them. And so it was kind of a time you don't think about because you're thinking of all the joyous like family reunions and the kissing posts and the journey to America. But there was also detention and also the hospitals that would treat those soldiers that had come home from the war and stuff too. So I will get back to you on that because I want to make sure I'm answering it correctly, and there is some dispute. So
Fair enough. Yeah. All right. So Ellie has the question, would a Catholic from what is now Northern Ireland, would they have said they were from the Irish Free State on a US Census in the 1930s and 40s? Ellie, the answer to that is that depends. It really does. It's a quite a loaded question. And remember political boundaries shifted quite a bit. And so it really would have depended on how they identified with their origin. I don't know, Jackie, if you have any other comments, but
no, that's right.
yeah, it really, really depends. So they could have said any number of things on that census. And remember that in the US, censuses were not sent to households. They were taken by an enumerator during that period who went door to door. So the enumerator was actually the person who wrote things down. So he may or she may have interpreted something, right? If they had said Northern Ireland, they might have just written Ireland or vice versa or whatever. So keep that in mind. Okay, so a couple of books that I want to make sure that get name dropped because they're very good on this topic. So Jackie, think of your favorite book to recommend too. The first one I'm going to talk about is an oldie but a goodie. They Became Americans. It's another naturalization book by Lou Zooks, but a fabulous, fabulous research guide. This one was published even earlier, 98 is when it came out, but Lou's a genius and she's wonderful. So everybody, if you're interested in naturalization and passenger lists, ethnic origins, you should look at that. If you are curious about Canada, you should read Destination Canada, a genealogical guide to immigration records by Dave Obey. This is a relatively new one on my shelf. I've had it less than a year, I think, but it's excellent. And he has a whole series of books about Canada. So if you want Canada, look for Destination Canada. And then the most recent edition, which I actually haven't even finished reading yet, is Tracing Immigrants Through the Port of New York, Early National Period to 1924. Jackie, have you read this one yet?
No,
This was
I have it though.
Yeah, so just published by the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. It is written by a statistician, professor of economics. So it's not written by a historian or a genealogist. So it's a completely different take on kind of the historical story of the port of New York. But this one should be excellent. So if you haven't heard of this one yet, take a look, try and find it. And again, we'll post all of these book titles in the thread when we're done with the live stream. Jackie, what's your list of books?
Well, so I said In the Shadow of Liberty, Edward Corsi. That's one of my favorite books. Honestly, I always am looking at the story that happened after. So another book I would recommend is On the Side of Mercy. It's written by Alice Davis Menken, and it's the story of a social worker and going into the tenements. So
Wow.
Those are always, I'm very keen to learn about like what happened after as well. And her book is absolutely fantastic. And a friend of mine, his ancestor wrote it. So it's especially like special.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the Tenement Museum in Manhattan has got to, that's another one on my bucket list, but it's
you
got to be
haven't
phenomenal.
been? Oh,
no, I haven't been.
Shame. No,
I
it's
know.
amazing. It's amazing. I can go again and again and just a different tour, a different tour, a different tour. It's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I was just going to mention that before 1930, it's back and forth. So I can't give an answer about babies born, what their nationality is. But by 1930, they are American. So.
Okay, great. So probably registered in Manhattan, right? Their birth.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Because the territory is, I know that's like a strange question too, and one of the myths, like New York does control like Ellis Island, but more than half of the actual island itself is owned by New Jersey as of like 98. There was a Supreme
That's
Court
right.
ruling. Yeah. It's
Wow, went
funny
all the way
though.
to the Supreme Court. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, so there was an 1834, there was an agreement, and the agreement was New York was in control of Bedloe's Island and of, I'm getting really dark in here. I gotta turn up sorry. It's
All
getting
right.
dark in New York
The sun
now.
is literally setting. Yeah.
But so in 1834 there was an agreement, and New York was in control of Bedloe's Island and of Ellis Island. But any submerged lands or water around it belonged to New Jersey. And it's funny because at the time there was a lot of excavation happening for the subways and all, so there was landfill being placed everywhere in Manhattan. So
Right.
you would think back then they would have included that as part of the agreement. Any landfill would also belong to New York, but they didn't. And so the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of New Jersey being having ownership of all the landfill, which is islands 2 and 3 essentially, and
Wow.
some parts of island 1. So for me as an employee there, I literally do cross the state line of New Jersey and New York at least 100 times a day. It's kind of funny, but I do. I'm going to the vending machine. I'm going to New Jersey, and I'll be back.
That's funny.
Especially like where my office is, because it's on the line of New York, New Jersey. Literally, like my office is the line. So.
That's awesome. I actually think that that is a fantastic way to bring this to a close. What a great story. So thank you, Jackie, so much for sharing your stories with us, sharing your knowledge with us. And for all of you out there watching, thank you very much for your comments, for participating. I know there was a lot that we didn't quite get to, but I will go back through and answer anything that I can. And we'll post these book recommendations and everything else. So get out there, get online, explore your ancestors, learn about the history of Ellis Island, learn about the social context, dig into some of these details, because this is where the stories are at, right? Is in experiences like this. Ellis Island is just a gateway. See what I did there? It's just a gateway to the rest of their story. So that being said, next week on Let's Discuss, you are actually going to have a chance, community, to talk about anything you want. We're going to bring in Brian Donovan and Miko Cleland and myself. We're all going to be on a panel together. You can literally ask any question about Findmypast, about genealogy, about the British Isles, about history, whatever it is Stump the Genealogist Day. And we're all really excited, and it'll be 9 o'clock at night for them. So I will hopefully have an advantage over the over the guys. No, it's all friendly competition. So we're excited about that. Ask us anything next week on Let's Discuss with myself, Brian, and Miko. And we'll go from there. So with that being said, thank you all very much for joining us. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.